Hello there. Today I'm continuing my look at some of New Zealand's Pinot Noirs from different regions around the country. This is from a particular sub-region, Bannockburn, and this is Mount Difficulty's Long Gully Pinot Noir from 2018. It's a single vineyard wine. So Mount Difficulty was founded in the early 1990s, and today they have some of the Bannockburn sub-region of central Otago's oldest vineyards. Now, the estate was actually founded on the basis of a handshake. It comprised 5 vineyards and was a cooperation between the 4 owners of those vineyards. Those owners being Molyneux, Manson's Farm, Verboke Farm and Full Circle. The estate made its first vintage in 1998, although initially it made very little wine and sold most of its fruit to producers such as Chard Farm and Gibbston Valley, more established wineries. And in fact, it wasn't until 2004 that the gentleman's agreement that had created the estate was actually formalised, and Mount Difficulty Wines Limited was created to take ownership of these vineyards. For all this period, however, wine had been made under the Mount Difficulty label, Mount Difficulty being the peak that rises above the vineyards here. Today, the company has about 40 hectares of vineyards, and these are not only in the Bannockburn sub-region, they're also in Bendigo, Gibbston and in Lowburn. The Mount Difficulty label, however, is reserved for wines coming from their Bannockburn vineyards, and wines from the other vineyards are sold under the equally popular Roaring Meg label. As well as Pinot Noir, they also grow Chardonnay, Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Gris, and have experimental plantings of Syrah and Chenin Blanc. Now, Mount Difficulty was purchased in 2019 by the Foley Family Wine Group. The group, founded by American billionaire Bill Foley, has interests in a number of New Zealand's leading wineries, for example, Martinborough Vineyards or Grove Mill. Bill Foley also has some quite comprehensive interests in sports teams and has actually just founded a soccer club in Auckland. The vineyards here in Bannockburn overlook the Cromwell Basin, and here the climate is continental. This is one of the warmer sub-regions of central Otago. You get high sunshine hours during the summer and it's relatively dry, making it a good place to be growing the sort of the fickle, thin-skinned Pinot Noir grape variety. The other advantage the region has is that there's quite a high diurnal temperature variation, with cool wind coming down from the mountain to reduce the temperature in the vineyards in the evenings, so enabling the fruit to retain acidity while still reaching good ripeness levels. Mount Difficulty have been making their single vineyard Pinot Noirs since 2001. And it's actually worth noting that Long Gully is the vineyard that is just across Felton Road from the Felton Road winery's Elms Vineyard, which is where Felton Road have their Block 3 and Block 5 vineyards, making 2 of the region's most famous wines. Long Gully has what are called lochar soils, and the vineyards have about 30 centimetres of topsoil over fine to coarse gravel, and this all overlays what they describe as a wavy clay pan. But despite its undulations, the clay pan is deep enough that it doesn't interfere either with the roots' growth or their ability to find water. There's good drainage here, and the vineyard is next to the Kawarau River. As I say, these are older vineyards, and the vines that produce this wine, some of them were 24 years old and the balance were 21 years old. So those are vines that are fully mature. They should have reached their full root extension and should be providing lovely low yields of concentrated fruit. The clones that were used here, one of them was a selection from Pomar, and the other is another popular clone in this region, simply known as 10 Bar 5. Their approach here is described as making minimal winery interventions. I should also say that 2018 was winemaker Matt Dicey's 20th vintage here at Mount Difficulty. The fruit was hand-picked across a week between the 13th and the 20th of March 2018, was destemmed, and the 2 clones were quite deliberately co-fermented to make sure that their different characteristics married in the final wine. For the first step, the fruit was given a 5 to 7 day cold soak, and during that period the skins were plunged back into the juice on a daily basis. The vats were then allowed to warm up, and fermentation occurred naturally, going on for about 6 to 8 days. A maximum temperature was reached of somewhere in the region of 30 degrees Celsius. And again, the skins were plunged back into the fermenting must daily. In all, the wine spent between 19 and 21 days on its skins, before being pressed and settled and the juice being put into barrel. The wine aged in French oak barrels. I'm not told what capacity they were or what percentage of new oak was used, but they remained in those barrels for 15 months. Once the wines warmed up in the spring after fermentation, they underwent a malolactic conversion. So I'm assuming that was probably the result of indigenous bacteria promoting that. The wine was finally bottled in the November of the year following vintage and went into bottle completely unfined and unfiltered. So let's have a look at it, shall we? First thing I'd say is that the colour actually looks really quite mature. There's an almost slight mahogany note to it. It is a sort of a brickish red. It's reasonably dark, but it really isn't very deep at all. I can see through it very easily. Looking at the wine as I swirl it, I've got a nice big glass to try and let as many of those aromas out as possible. As I swirl it, the wine has 14.5% alcohol and is throwing tears quite noticeably on the edges of the glass. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? Those aromas are very developed, really quite savoury. There's a depth of dark, ripe fruit coming through there. So you do have some quite sort of lifted, almost floral perfumes at the top, but the core of those aromas is almost dried fruit. It's dark plum, prune, fig. There are sultana notes. There are also slightly earthy notes of dried leaves on a forest floor. Really developed savoury notes. There's plenty going on in those aromas there, but it smells like a mature wine. So let's have a taste. On the palate, the wine is dry. Initially you get quite earthy sensations, and then suddenly quite a sort of a ripe, rich, I would say really ripe, dark plum, almost through to a sort of a cooked prune sort of note. There's a slight sort of leathery note. There's some really lovely development aromas here. There are earthy notes. There's a very clear forest floor, dried leaves note. There are quite rounded tannins. There is a sort of a slightly drying aspect to them, but it's a dusty drying note. It's not a harsh or aggressive drying astringency. It's almost as if there's a sort of a drying velvety note on the tongue. The finish has this richness of sort of prune fruit, almost through to a more rich raisin note. I don't want to sound as if I'm criticising the developed notes of this, because there's enough freshness that there's an absolutely lovely, lifted, dark red fruit plumminess around the edges of this wine. There's a lovely harmony in the textures, and it's lasting really well. I would say the winemaker's notes suggest this is a wine that could be kept for 10 to 15 years. This seems really nicely mature to me already. I would assume they mean 10 to 15 years from vintage. So this already has nearly 6 years maturity. I certainly don't think there's any need to age it for a longer period. And while it seems relatively open, it doesn't seem like a hugely concentrated wine. I would also note that it's got 14.5% alcohol, and yet the alcohol seems in balance. So there's sufficient of that rich, dark fruit in its core to stop that from giving any sort of burn there. Looking at our Wine Searcher aggregated critic score, we don't actually have a score for this vintage of this wine, but the aggregation across the various vintages brings this out to 91 out of 100. I think that's a very reasonable score. Or I could find myself arguing that its complexity and its harmony could well justify a score of 92 out of 100. I think it's certainly a wine that shows the rich, ripe, dark fruit character that I expect to see from wines from Bannockburn. So thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, we'd be very grateful if you'd press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, do please sign up and follow our YouTube channel. That would be fantastic. That way you can also set yourself an alert and be notified every time we publish a new tasting. If you have any comments, please pop those in the comments box below. We'd love for you to hear your feedback on the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please also pass it on to them. We would really appreciate your endorsement in that way. I'll leave a link in the notes below to this vintage of this wine so that you can follow that and you can find out where the wine's available in your market, what its pricing is. You can use the tabs on that page to find out more about the producer, the grape variety and the region, and also the winemaking. There are other tabs relating to the critic scores, to any awards the wine's won, to its price history, and where you can compare vintages. So hopefully that's providing you with plenty of information to make an informed consideration about buying this wine. So thank you once again for joining us, and I do hope you'll make some time in the very near future and come and watch another video tasting with us. Till then, bye for now.